Glad to have Scott Ardavanis with us today. Scott, so thankful for you. And as we spend a few minutes talking about preaching and ministry, I want to just say at the onset, one of the things I have so appreciated about you since I've gotten to know you the last couple of years has been the joy that you exude. It's a Christ-centered joy, and I'm thankful for that. When I've had the chance to hear you preach a time or two in person, I've had a chance to watch you when you and I were recording some videos for the Master's Fellowship, in conversations even just recently now with our church staff today. Just thankful for the joy that you have in the Lord.
Praise the Lord.
It's infectious, it's genuine, it's encouraging. And I know that ministry can be hard, and we all are familiar with the demands of ministry.
Yes.
But personally, I'm just thankful for examples like you of men who serve with joy and love what they do. So thank you. I want to say at the very beginning how much I appreciate that. So just a few things to think about with me today. When you think about your years in ministry, what are some things you've learned about spiritual leadership through the years of pastoring God's people?
Boy, that's a real broad category, isn't it? When you think about the totality of spiritual leadership, there's so much to say there. Let me say this, maybe do something a little bit out of the box on that, because there's so many common things there. But let me address it from a side of maybe from a lead pastor working with maybe a group of elders, maybe working with a group of staff,
Sure.
And maybe the trajectory of a pastor with his people. I think, and I don't think these things are a secret to me, but I've made them part of a DNA that I have in terms of leadership that I look for and leadership that I drive at. I call them the 5 C's. Excuse me, the 5 C's. And some, I don't think it's familiar to me. I think even some organizations use this, but it creates a litmus test for me on leaders that I look for and who serve alongside me. And I'll be brief here. One, excuse me, is obviously character. Mm-hmm. We begin with that C, character, because biblically, 1 Timothy 3, Titus chapter 1, you don't look for the gifted, you look for those who are modeling a character described by Paul to Timothy and described by Paul to Titus, those characteristics listed of an elder. That's crucial. And I think the thing I like to say about character is that all of those qualifications, we don't point this out enough, Michael, most of those qualifications, if not all of them, have to do with the man's relationship with people. You can't be a one-woman man by yourself. You usually are not self-willed in a vacuum. It comes out with people. If you're going to be hospitable to people, if you're going to be above reproach, most of those characteristics flow from a man's relationship with people. So it has really very little to do with the degree that hangs on our wall, but the character of a man. So you look for that. I think everybody knows that. Secondly, I look for chemistry. I look for a guy who not only is character qualified, but a guy who fits on the team, a guy who knows how to work with the team, a guy who's not so self-willed that he has to get his own way, but he's part of a leadership team. And so that chemistry is crucial. I think some men are drawn to leadership because they want to fix something and they come with an agenda. And certainly we want to hear what is on a particular man's heart, but the ability to fit with the team, the ability to function on the team, the ability for that man to function biblically in humility is just crucial. And so I would just say, as I think of our elder team, 13 men, 5 of those pastors full-time. The others 8, I believe, are, I don't use that term, they're lay elders. 13 elders. But when I put a guy on our team, I want to make sure that he's going to add value to our team and not be a stick in the mud there because of his own agenda or his own conscience and so forth. So character, chemistry, competency. I think when I look for spiritual leadership, I want to know that the guy is competent in an area of ministry. And if you're looking for staff people, he has to be competent to do the job description of what you've asked him to do. I think often we bring a guy in who's character qualified, but he doesn't have a competency to do the very job description that you're asking him to do. And some people might, hearing this, might say, well, gosh, if he's character qualified, wouldn't that count? And I'd say no. He could be character qualified, but if you're looking at a staff guy at some level, he's got to be competent and have the gifts to do what you're asking him to do. And so I don't mean to be so formal, but we have job descriptions for everybody because there's an aspect that I want this particular young man to fulfill, or a young woman in a discipleship area, or in a office administration side. The fourth C is the word capacity. So look for character, then I look for chemistry, I look for competency, but as much as you can in spiritual leadership, I look for capacity. And I don't mean that by looking for an external factor in there, but I look for a guy that has a capacity, if it's a pastoral position, to go beyond what I have on paper. I'd like to see this guy grow on his own and be teachable, faithful, but he's got a capacity beyond what I'm asking him to do. That's a hard one to look for. And then the last one is courage, Michael. Always find a man, at least at an elder, at a pastoral level, that will always have the courage to do what's right for the church and not his own well-being. You look for a guy who would never hurt the bride of Christ. And we can't control those things, but some men are selfish and it's about them. And if they don't have courage, they could hurt the body or hurt that local church that they're serving in. So that's a little matrix for me. And there's different nuances of that. But when I think of spiritual leadership, both at a staff level and even an elder level, I'm looking for components of that that will balance us so that we look more like the Lord Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So we want character, we want chemistry with the group, we want competency with the job they're being asked to do, a capacity to add value to what we're doing, and then courage to do what God's calls us. That's so helpful. That's really good. Thank you for summarizing that in such an easy to remember way, and that's super helpful. Let's talk just a minute about the actual role of preaching. You've been preaching each Lord's Day for a number of years now. So just walk us through a typical week of sermon preparation. I understand not every week is normal and strange things come up, but in terms of sermon preparation, if there is a normal pattern and rhythm to how you do that, what would your sermon preparation look like throughout a given week?
Yeah, that's a good question and a full question, isn't it? I mean, I'm trying to be helpful here. I've been expositing the scripture for 35 years. I've been in study for 40. And so between my study at the Master's University, where I had 2 years of Greek before seminary, then going to seminary, having Greek and Hebrew, and then doing my doctorate at TEDS, Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. There's all that goes into that hermeneutically. And then there's just the practice of preaching. But usually what I would do is pick out an 8.5, 11, sheet of paper, write the verse down on the top. I would usually try to go into the Greek and Hebrew to some degree, nuancing that. But even if I backed up before that, I would be reading and studying for months on a book, on reading through the book, getting the big picture of the book, looking at the broad sweeping scope of the book. For example, I mentioned to you earlier that I just started the book of Daniel. Yeah. And I would say that I don't even know. I mean, I think I probably had 80 hours into Daniel before I started, maybe more. And that would just be going through the book, looking for the purpose of the book, going through each chapter of the book, looking at chapters 1 through 12, assessing where they're going, creating an outline of the book, looking at the study of the dates, which is a huge one for Daniel, studying the historical background, reading different commentaries, reading different theological works. I mean, I just finished my third message, but I must have had 80 hours into that. And then I was breaking it down chapter by chapter. And Michael, the reason I say that is out of our own background, we become, I don't know if they would teach that, but let me say this, the problem of a young expositor, including myself, when I pastored in Chicago, I would go through my exegesis. I started at one point in the book of Ephesians, and I'd go through my exegesis and I would study it. I'd study the syntax, I'd study the lexical, I'd study the languages, and then I just run out of time. And I thought, boy, I probably have too much for Sunday. I'll do Ephesians 1 through 4 on choosing. And then on Monday, I ended up with another blank page. And then I had to go back, and then I did 4 through 6. And I thought, boy, I probably, 20 pages of notes, I probably had too much. And then I had to stop. And I remembered as a young expositor, I was looking at the trees so much that I was missing the forest. And if you do that as an expositor, you begin to lose the authorial intent of the author. And so I remember calling Dr. John MacArthur, and I said, I'm getting buried. I'm preaching my guts out on Sunday, and then I'm coming to a dry blank page on Monday, starting over again. And through his counsel and through Dr. Richard Mayhew and his counsel, I realized the importance early on as an expositor through mistakes that you've got to preach the paragraph. And so for now, rather than just taking up the author's exposition and running out of time, it's crucial to take Paul's intent on Ephesians 1, 3 through 14 and get the scope of it, that the Father has chosen, the Son has redeemed, the Spirit has sealed, and see that as one, than just only getting the trees and only looking at the trees. You're missing the forest. And so I just think I had to correct myself as a young expositor to make sure I was always looking at author's intent and then getting the big picture and then going down to the particulars. So I think as an expositor, and of course I've been teaching at the seminary now, professors at the master's seminary over 20 years now, and it's so easy for an early expositor to go grab the trees and miss the forest. So I think it's crucial that you begin with the big picture, then go back to the particulars. And that's helped me a little bit over the years from keeping on the theme of that. So I'll look for that at the beginning, then I'll break it down into paragraphs, and then from the paragraphs, break it down into units of sermon intent. That always the main goal is to get the sermons, the author's intent, and then from that to preach that and then the implications of that text for today. And that comes through the hours of background work, and then it comes through hours of exegesis out of the text. But I'm very big, maybe the last statement, MacArthur said it, and I just think it was helpful. When you're doing a main point, you are always explaining a main point, but then secondly, you're always giving the implication of that main point. So as you're exegeting, drawing out of the text what the author said, invariably you've got to give the so what for the people. So that's what I do. It takes me hours. I would say I'm probably 18 hours on a message for a presentation of that in my exposition of ministry. And I'm just ballparking that
Yeah.
because in some ways you're at it much longer than that with all the
Right.
background work you've done. So
For
that's
sure.
a little bit of a week. I think the one final thing, Michael, that I would add is in the early years, because I've been expositing 35, I think I would just run out of time at the end of the week. You know, Pastor, when are you done? Well, just when you run out of time.
Right. Right.
And Sunday is coming.
Right.
And I realized the danger of that, which usually meant, Michael, for guys like you and I, you just got to read one more commentary.
Mhm.
You got to read one more commentary. And so I finished the book of Ephesians. I probably, without exaggeration, have 150 books, commentaries in Ephesians, both in my physical library and combined with my Logos.
Yeah.
I don't think it might be more than that. Well, I can't do 150.
Right.
And in the early years, I just would keep going. But a guy at TEDS at Trinity said something that changed my life. He said, "You guys are spending so much time on your exegesis." It was one of the doctor, it was one of a PhD professor. He's a neat guy, and I'm from the master's seminary, and I'm at TEDS. But he said, "You guys should spend 70% of your time on the last 5 minutes of your message, and or the last 10 minutes." And I just sat there and I grumbled. I thought, gosh, there's no way in my heart,
Right.
there's no way I'm doing that. And I thought, even today, I'm not doing that. But I'll tell you, I was convicted by it because I thought we just run out of time
Right.
and we do what I call the dump truck on people.
Yeah.
We put all of our exegesis in the back of the dump truck, and then we hit the driver hits the levee to, and then all the exegesis comes
Right.
out.
Right.
And as guys who are well trained, that we trust, we give them all the content. So I think I was saying that my week, Michael, I say this: you better be in the jugular of the passage on the author's intent by Tuesday. And then I'm beginning to carefully craft a little bit more carefully on Wednesday and Thursday. And Michael, I don't know if this is true, but you know, they talk about in the film industry when they edit a movie that they leave so much film on the cutting floor.
Right.
And I would probably say I leave half
Yeah.
of my exegesis on the cutting floor because
Yeah.
you just can't give that to the people in a 45-minute sermon.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of the process.
Yeah, you know, one of the things I get to do is serve as a preaching mentor for doctoral students at TMS.
Yes.
And two of the things that often come up, one is I will ask them, what did you take out of your message last week that hurt you? It hurt to pull it out. And if they don't have any answer, then I'm telling them your preparation wasn't done. There's got to be some things where you say, this was good, this was true, but it's not laser focused on what I'm doing.
Yes.
You got to do that. Then the other thing is I'll often ask pastors I work with what they think is their biggest weakness. And inevitably, the guys that I mentor and the guys I work with tell me that their biggest weakness is how to end a message, the conclusion of a message. And I'll always ask them, how much time did you spend preparing for that?
Yes.
And the answer is almost zero. And so I tell them, here's the good news. You're not bad at it because you can't. you're bad at it because you don't give yourself permission to care about that.
Yes.
And I think maybe guys like us who rightly do care about the exegetical work, rightly do care about getting the text right, need to also care about how our people receive it and how we communicate it to them in a way that's helpful, that they can manage. And so I think what you shared is really helpful and a great word for those of us who share these common convictions about what good preaching is, but that we don't want to just overload them with data. We want to bring the authorial intent to bear upon their heart, so they understand what the Spirit has said. That's really helpful. One last question: when you think about not just your local assembly, but just the church in general, true biblical faithful churches today, what would you say is the biggest threat, or maybe the biggest couple of threats that churches today are facing? Or challenges. Challenge may be a better word than threats.
Challenges. That's just such a good question, and it's so broad, isn't it? Because you're battling with many different elements there, and there's uniqueness to that at different parts of the country and different cities, and some of the denominational battles going on within even the Southern Baptist Convention. I keep reading things there. They have a big meeting this summer, and so much of the vote will come out. I know one of the big ticket items is the women's role and so forth. But I really think, of course, you're asking me the question, but I think one of the biggest challenges, at least as I work with pastors and I teach as a professor at the Master's Seminary here at the distance location, as you do at the home campus in the summer, is helping men establish not only a doctrinal mooring to the truth, which is vital, for them to have a clear doctrinal statement. It's vital. It's foundational to a high view of God and a high view of Scripture. But I think where my heart presses into in the men that we're training is to help them have a biblical philosophy of ministry that comes out of the Scripture, that emanates in the churches that they lead, so that their churches invariably are being led by the scriptural mandates rather than the latest event, the latest strategy, the latest program, but it's truth coming out from that lead pastor. As Lloyd Jones used to say, preaching is truth. It's logic coming out through a man on fire. But I think the need today is for churches to have not only a biblical mooring doctrinally, but a biblical strategy. And here comes one of the cruxes, Michael, just from my humble opinion. There's many other thoughts that could be said, but the need, not just for an academic degree, but the need for young men to have a biblical model so that they've seen truth in a local church lived out. And when I think of Paul, who kept saying to Timothy, you have followed my teaching, my love, my faith, my conduct, my perseverance. He called Timothy not just to the truth itself. Yes, he did do that, but he called him to the breathing model of the Apostle Paul, who modeled those things. I think so many young men today leading the churches have not been in a healthy local church, and it's hurting them. Of course, I had the beauty of growing up not at the Master's Seminary. I had the beauty of growing up with Dr. John MacArthur at the local church. I told you at one point, I've known him for over 50 years. I was there as a little kid, but there's no question in my mind. I don't have my degrees on the wall yet because we're building a new office center at our church. But if I put the degrees on my wall, I would rank them this way. The academic degrees would definitely would go underneath another frame that I have, and that frame is my ordination from Grace Community Church.
Mm-hmm.
You say, why? Because there were 40 men putting their hand on my life, my teaching, my doctrine, my love, my patience, who ordained me to the gospel ministry. Michael, I think one of the biggest challenges today is that our younger men heading towards ministry not only can think accurately doctrinally, but who have been trained in what I would say would be a biblical model of the scriptures lived out. So that's to me still a vital challenge today, even in churches that are like-minded, maybe even doctrinally.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your wisdom. Thank you for what you do, and may the Lord continue to bless your ministry there.
Hey, thank you
Appreciate
so
you.
much,
Thank
Michael.
you.